No, why is it not focusing? Come on. Come on. I paid good money for you. Ugh, whatever. You'll have to get by without being able to see my blemish-covered face. The worst thing about COVID so far, having gotten over all of the major symptoms, has been everything is just, like, shedding now. Like, it's horrific. You can't really see it, but, like little red marks everywhere. It's, ugh. It's awful. Oh, man. Anyways, how are we all? No, the music's not from Civ, it's just some royalty-free Kevin MacLeod stuff, but a lot of their stuff's actually really good. I've been using that for a while. They have a lot of royalty-free versions of classical music, too. It's why I have, I wish I could use the actually orchestrated version of Dots Macabre when I do that, but they have one that's done on computer, so... It does the job, but it's definitely not the best version. True, long live the new flesh. I should rewatch them. The only time I saw Videodrome was when I was like a teenager and I didn't get it. It was just a gross, creepy, stale, weird 90s experimental movie. Was it from the 90s? I can't remember. I didn't like it though, but I probably would appreciate it now. I DM'd you the song, Eudaimonia. You can find it there. It's called Night Dreams by Kevin MacLeod. So, what are we doing tonight? We've got two things on the docket. First, let's make myself small so I can broadcast how magnanimous and secure I am in my size. There we go. That was phrased very terribly. Disregard that. Put it to brain fog. Anywho. Dear Lord. This is why I'm interested in the Hunter Avallone conversation, because I'm usually not interested in Hunter Avallone conversations. No offense to the man, but he's generally pretty boring. But, where's my... Show up on the screen. I click the eye thing. Get on there. Hang on, do I need to center it? What's going on? Alrighty then. Hang on, let's see. Why is that not showing up? There we go. No, we don't want that. It's just not showing it. Oh, that is bizarre. Okay, what if I open it in Paint? Yes, that should work. Okay. There we go. Huzzah, O frabjeste collucale. Shoo. Oh, why are you over there? Get over there. And why are you trimmed like that? Okay, hang on. Everybody stay calm. I've got this. We will add another display capture. Or a window capture. A window capture. There we go. And this will just be called Paint. Because why not? There we go. Now you can see it. Beautiful. But we want to be over it. Nope. Where'd you... Oh, it's in. It got absorbed into here. Of course it did. I hate the menu in OBS. I hate it so much. There's no safe way to, like, locate stuff on the screen without accidentally collapsing it into another thing. It's really inelegant. But, in any case, we have managed. So, let's zoom out of this a little bit. So, long story short, and it is a short story, actually. Apparently, Hunter had this debate with some religious person. I think it had to do with Exodus. So we're going to be digging into the Bible today. Isn't that exciting, kids? And this person who I interact with occasionally on Twitter, I don't know anything about them, but SchizoBailey, Enclave Arc, critiqued their performance. It's so annoying to watch Hunter Avallone still try to debate religious scripture. Dude doesn't seem to have any analytical literary skills and just goes to the most brain-dead reading of the text. And then Hunter did something rather interesting. He invited him onto chat. I'm assuming it's a him. I shouldn't assume it's a him. He invited them onto chat. Would you like to chat today? I'd love to know how my interpretation of Exodus 10 is a brain-dead reading. This person will lose a debate against me within 15 minutes. It's confidence. Except then he blocked SchizoBailey immediately afterwards and deleted this tweet. So now they're talking. So now it went like this. So I unblocked you, LMAO. Actually, this person was already blocked a while ago, so your other Langer blocked me afterwards. Da, da, da. So apparently there's a debate that's going to happen on this at some point, or I imagine that'll be the follow-up to all of this. But we're going to watch the debate itself and see how bad it was, and depending on how interesting it is, I might actually look. The person he was debating posted some thoughts afterwards or whatever. So we're going to do that. And I just realized I got the order wrong because I was originally going to do the Pseudoscience video first. Do we want to do the Pseudoscience video first, or do we want to do the Hunter stuff first? It doesn't matter to me. I can cut it all up later. Alright. You know what? We're just going to do the debate. We're going to do the debate. And then we'll do the... Pseudoscience video as a treat afterwards. Boom, boom. Alright. Pardon me clearing my throat a lot. It's been a slow recovery. Okay. Wow, that's very big. Okay, let's make that a bit smaller there. Beautiful. Okay. Here we go.
People lie.
Okay, I feel like I think that you're right that people lie, and I think right now you're lying to yourself. I appreciate you coming on. Yes, you are. I appreciate you coming on here. You need to reread the verse. You're just telling yourself that it's being interpreted wrong, but yet there's no justification for that, other than you don't want to believe the more literal interpretation and the way that's clear and internally consistent.
Okay, so we're looking at the Plague of Locusts. Why are we looking at the Plague of Locusts? What point or purpose is there in looking at the Plague of Locusts? This is not the kind of thing I would imagine comes up very frequently in religious debates, because, I don't know, what's there to debate about? God sent some locusts, ruined the Egyptians' farming. That seems pretty self-explanatory. Alright. Well, we have it bookmarked, so we'll be able to refer to it very quickly.
Hold on, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to sit here and allow you to tell me what I'm getting wrong when you clearly have you can not believe in God. I don't care whether or not you believe in God, but I'm not going to sit here and let you tell me what I got wrong, because I know this stuff better than you do.
Well, it doesn't show. Maybe you just need to work a little harder on that then. Because if you either you know more than I do and you're just really bad at communicating it, or you're lying again that you know more than me.
It was about last time, because you misinterpreted Exodus 10:1, because
Exodus 10:1. Okay, hold on.
Exodus 10:1, so we're very specific.
Oh. Hold on.
Okay, so Exodus 10:1, dear friends, is... Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go into Pharaoh." Oh, that is very unfortunate. I can see how somebody might misread that. "Go into Pharaoh, for I have hardened..." Oh boy, it just gets worse and worse, doesn't it? "For I have hardened his heart..." Thank God, okay. "And the heart of his servants, that I may show these signs of mine among them." That's Exodus 10:1. Because now it's Exodus 10:2. "And that you may tell in the hearing of your son and of your son's son how I have made sport of the Egyptians, and what signs I have done among them, that you may know that I am the Lord." And then it's 3. What is there to misinterpret? Besides the aforementioned.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart." Okay, go ahead.
You misinterpret. Oh yeah, you misinterpreted because one, for one, God was not being literal. He was just saying basically, the Pharaoh will not listen to me, and will not listen to you.
Wait. No way. No way. He's not going to do what I think he's going to do. Is he going to interpret the verse as God having literally calcified the Pharaoh's heart? I guess we'll see.
But still warn him what will happen if you don't free his people. That was just basically.
Then why did God say he was the one who did it?
And okay, good. Okay, good. So we're okay. Okay, fair enough. So the issue is not that brain dead. I'm just very tired. The issue is that God sent Moses to perform a task that he already declared was futile because of his own intervention. So he's making Pharaoh stubborn, so that Pharaoh will not be receptive to the threats of the plagues, so that he can show the plagues, so that the plagues can be manifest, there's a justification for them, so that he can look really powerful. Okay. Fair enough. Alright.
Isn't just the only time.
That is a pickle.
Okay, you need to understand the whole context of Exodus. It was basically the Pharaoh basically not listening to God. They did not believe the God of Israel.
No, I understand. I know the story, and I also know that it is commonly depicted as Pharaoh being just really stubborn. But I don't understand why God would say, "I have hardened his hearts and the hearts of his officials," and then he gives a good explanation. Like, it seems like you're jumping through more hoops to try and interpret it differently than the literal reading. Like, he not only says he did it, but then he gives a reason why he did it.
The thing is, the way I understand it is, harden his heart, the Pharaoh's heart and his officials already hardened.
So at the end, so look, after the plague of locusts is spread throughout the land because Pharaoh's heart was hardened and he didn't heed Moses' warnings, Exodus 10:20, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart and he did not let the children of Israel go. Yeah, so this is fair. I don't see why this would bear on a free will conversation, though. For the simple reason that there's a discrete explanation for Pharaoh's will in particular being predetermined. It doesn't seem as though this would bear on people generally. The question would just be, does Pharaoh have free will? In which case, the moral question is Pharaoh a baddie? Which is just not particularly interesting. The more interesting question would be to do with, does a loving God brute force people into dooming themselves and their people and their firstborn children as part of a shock and awe demonstration, when the only remaining evidence of it is an unverifiable document printed in a factory thousands of years later? Because we don't see the plagues. We have no record of them. We have this thing. That's not particularly impressive. Anybody can write stuff down.
Against him. He did not do anything. He just know it because, God is all-knowing. But that's the situation. That was the context being. He was not being literal in that sense. Like, it's just, to me, it's just you're presenting a bad reading.
No, I'm not. It's more okay. So first of all, Exodus 10. Yeah, Exodus 10:1. I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials. The next one, the Lord changed the wind, blah, blah, blah. Not a locust was left anywhere in Egypt. Listen to this.
Yeah, that not a locust left anywhere in Egypt. That's in. Would that be an ecological disaster? I'm pretty sure the locust did perform an important function.
Exodus 10:16. Pharaoh quickly summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now forgive my sin once more and pray." Sorry, I lost that there for a second. "And pray to the Lord your God to take this deadly plague away from me." Moses then left Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord, and the Lord changed the wind. So they carried the locusts away. Then Exodus 10:20, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. Why is Pharaoh literally saying he was wrong and repenting, and then God is literally intervening and hardening his heart again?
Again, that's a misinterpretation.
Nah, dude, you're in denial right now.
I'm not. The thing is, that's a misinterpretation because Pharaoh was still being stubborn, still not listening. It
doesn't sound like he was stubborn when he said he has sinned and was begging for forgiveness.
Yeah, I'm with Hunter on this one. I don't know how on earth you would read this in the reverse direction. Let's see. Maybe there's a note here we can find. Let's see here. God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Original language. I think that would have been... We would have been translating from Greek or Aramaic? Let's see. Okay, this is a rather denominationally slanted website, but this one says, I'm on notjustanotherbook.com. English language translations wrongly translate 912, including da-da-da-da-da. However, rather than harden, hazak literally means to strengthen, and along with heart, lev can also mean desire or will. Thus, an equally valid translation is that the Lord strengthened Pharaoh's will. It's still an artificial strengthening of the will when his will had bent to meet the demand, so it doesn't strike me as a particularly meaningful distinction. It also suggests some kind of theory of emotions, I suppose, where there's some kind of meter of strength of will that can either be peaked or diminished, but I don't think that's how that works. Yeah, this is irrelevant. Okay.
You ever consider that people may lie?
But he's doing it over and over again. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and said, go worship the Lord. Even your women and children may go with you.
But,
blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. If he lied, God hardening Pharaoh's heart wouldn't precede that, right? Pharaoh would do that by himself. His heart wouldn't need to be hardened. His heart remained hardened. He lied.
But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he was not willing to let them go. So I don't know. It sounds like you're the one misinterpreting it, to be honest, my friend.
No, I'm not misinterpreting it.
Okay.
You're misinterpreted it. I explained why.
You didn't explain why. You just gave your opinion. That's not even justified.
Well, that's my read, Brooks. In every translation, it just means that God stopped him from considering mercy. Well, not considering mercy, but from bending from containing the Israelites in slavery. It was weirdly phrased in keeping the Israelites in slavery. I haven't heard his alternative reading yet. Maybe he'll go into detail on that in the afterwards. But
and the verse is way clearer the other way around with what I'm saying.
One, again, it's a consistent theme throughout. Again, it's a consistent theme throughout the Bible. Throughout the Bible, especially in the Old Testament and to the lesser extent the New Testament, that when God says something, especially through his prophets, he means it. And when you don't listen to him, bad things tend to happen. There's consequence. consequences
It doesn't bear on this issue.
It sounds like when you read the story, Pharaoh was listening to him, and then God was preventing him from doing it.
God was not preventing him from doing
He said, this is why I'm explaining to you. From my perspective, the entire verse is consistent. Your perspective makes no sense.
Here's the problem, right? So it's not simply a question of whether or not God's intervention is responsible for Pharaoh in the story failing to yield to Moses' demands. There's a specific motive given in the beginning of the story for why God would not want that outcome. Because he says very specifically, I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I may show you these signs of mine among them, and that you may tell in the hearing of your son and of your son's son, how I have made sport of the Egyptians, and what signs I have done among them, that you may know that I am the Lord. Unquote. That's telling you precisely that there is a purpose to Moses, or to Pharaoh, not yielding, because if Pharaoh yields, then the Israelites will leave without any spectacle. And he wants the spectacle. He wants this to be a memorable event. So God's will would be flouted if Pharaoh's heart did not harden. So this is a silly argument by the guest. I'm sorry.
And also means because hold on, I'm explaining because from your version you have to just like tell yourself that that's not what it meant, even though that's what it's saying in front of you. So first, it's entirely consistent with God's behavior throughout this entire chapter, because it says, the first beginning of it is, I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may perform these signs of mine among them, that you may tell your children and grandchildren how I dealt harshly with the Egyptians, and how I perform my signs among them, and that you may know that I am the Lord. So God's reason for this was because he wanted to flex that he was God. And so then...
Yeah, Hunter's just correct here, unfortunately. You saw the thing. I came into this perfectly equipped. You can even see the title. I came into this perfectly equipped to take Hunter to the woodshed if he was doing something dumb. But this is fair. He's correct.
And every time Pharaoh's caving, God goes in there, hardens his heart up again, and then...
I don't know why Bailey was bashing him on Twitter. This seems reasonable. I don't know what... Like, you can get into an interesting debate maybe on whether or not Pharaoh was free, but that seems sort of immaterial to me. It doesn't seem clear to me that there is a doctrine of free will, quote-unquote, in the Old Testament anywhere implied. But, I mean, you can have a conversation about that. But that doesn't change the fact that in this narrative, it seems pretty clear-cut that Pharaoh's decision was predetermined and or caused by God's intervention. So, like, I don't see how else you could read it. There's not really a whole lot of poetical wiggle room here when God literally says, I'm going to stop Pharaoh from being receptive to your demands because I want there to be justification for the spectacle that will ensue when I punish him for not meeting your demands.
Keeps on showing off his signs. What I'm saying, the interpretation I'm giving is what's being read, my friend. You're coping.
Well, so you're gonna go against years of theology and Bible and studies of the Bible.
Yes.
Bible and interpretations of the Bible. So
I grew up in a religious household. I've had this story read and discussed around me hundreds and hundreds of times. I went to a religious school for a little while where we actually just read the Bible for an hour a day. I've read commentaries on this. I've never seen anyone challenge the idea, in all seriousness, that when God said that he would harden the heart of Pharaoh for a specific purpose, and this follows through, that this did not mean precisely that. It doesn't make sense otherwise.
So you basically say that God is imposing his wills on the Pharaoh, because that's not how God works throughout the Old Testament, Old
Yeah, it is though. God sends an evil spirit to determine to send Saul, for example, into a rage, and to embarrass himself. That happens. This is like a frequent occurrence. If you read Thomas Hobbes, he spends a ton of time actually giving a materialistic account of all this. What does it mean when a spirit sent from God overtakes somebody? He argues that God in some way orchestrates that a certain disposition overtakes the person because he denies the existence of incorporeal spirits in humans, things like that. But he's only motivated to do this precisely because this is a frequent characteristic of Scripture. If you're interested in this, it's actually very interesting. A lot of the old early modern and late medieval political theorists delve into this stuff quite a bit. I think Baudin does a little bit as well. But if you look here on like the Kingdom of Darkness, this entire section at the end, and of a Christian Commonwealth, this is all about that stuff. It gets really interesting, actually. Not particularly important in the grand scheme, but it's interesting.
Testament.
Again, you're in denial. You have an image. You have an image in your head, probably of how you were taught of how God is supposed to be. So when you're confronted with clear depictions of God behaving in a way that's contradictory to the way you were raised, you don't know how to handle it, and so you just break down and make justifications. You're saying God doesn't do this. That's not how God. It is how God works. God does do this because this is what He did.
Okay.
So that's why I'm saying you're coping.
Coping. Let's see. I'm perfectly willing to admit that the God of the Bible, the Old Testament, is very violent.
And God is punishing. The same today, yesterday, and forever, right?
Oh, I feel bad for this kid. He's just confused. This is not a bullet. This is not like a difficult bullet to bite, right? Because even if you were to grant this person's absurd read that God claimed he was orchestrating and desired the outcome that Pharaoh was not receptive to Moses' demand so that he would have occasion to produce the spectacle of the plagues. Even if you wanted to read against that, you would still have the situation of the entirety of Christian scripture being an orchestration of a long sequence of horrendously catastrophic events, horrendously evil deeds, to produce a specific set of events and fulfill revelation and covenants and all that weird stuff. You still are in a situation where you have to account for all of this stuff being a matter of choice, because this is the preferred sequence of events by a being that is all-powerful, which in itself isn't a contradiction, but you need to reconcile this with all loving. That's when it gets difficult for people. So it's kind of it's irrelevant. That's the immediate thought I have here. I don't know why on earth he's dying on this hill, because even getting Hunter to yield on this, assuming there was a coherent read that contained his conclusion on this, the guests, I mean, it doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't help you at all.
Yeah, but the point of the being is when God, the story.
Not Brooks. So you came in a little bit late. I looked up a translation earlier. So, as you say, there are the word that is translated into, or the words that are translated into hardened Pharaoh's heart basically means God strengthened his will. But from my vantage point, it's the same difference. Because Pharaoh's will changed in response to an event. There was the plague of locusts, and then he was like, "No, I've sinned against God." Moses, da da da. Fine, I'll let you go. And then God strengthened his will, so that he then wouldn't follow through on the thing that he willed already. So for me, there's not a meaningful distinction there. If the argument is something to the effect of like there is some substance of freedom within Pharaoh that God either violated or didn't, and maybe he strengthened, increased Pharaoh's freedom with the perverse effect that he chose wrongly, which God apparently desired as an outcome, that you get into some philosophically interesting territory there. But that doesn't really bear on the question of whether or not God is responsible for the outcome itself, in terms of his intervention is what caused Pharaoh to make the decision that he did in this story. That seems like the intent of it.
Story of God's wrath. It's not. It is out of anger. Throughout the Bible, it says the Lord was hot in his anger, etc.
Okay.
But the point being is, it's always justified in the sense that we were doing wrong, that we were going against him, going out the line.
You're just repeating the same thing you already said, and that's not going to cut it because according to the story, Pharaoh was not.
Okay, this is I will object to this though. This kid is obviously on the back foot. He doesn't have a lot of confidence. He seems a little bit flustered and overwhelmed. Hunter needs to learn how to get out of debate bro mode when you're dealing with somebody like this, because at this point it's like you're not even having a conversation anymore. The kid can't get a sentence out. Not because the sentence will be good. I don't think he has any clue what he's doing, but like it's getting Hunter is abrasive in the most goddamn annoying way possible. And this is such an easy, like, low buy-in argument to begin with. Like you can afford to be patient with this one. This isn't helping anybody. This is just bullying this dumb kid here.
Doing something wrong. He was complying with God's wishes, then...
See, that's not it either. The plagues would change his will. He didn't want to let them go. The plagues were a threat, and he strengthened him so he can continue to be evil. Yeah, fair. You know, I think it's... I think that's more or less what I said, but fair enough. But I would actually take Hobbes' reading. If you yield, you will the outcome, right? It doesn't mean that Pharaoh's democratic freedom was being honored in that context. But he did it was his will, it was his decision to concede to the threat. And not even just the threat, but to the event, right? Like a surrender is still an act of will. It is a surrendering of your will, but it is an act of will. Since the scale was so heavily weighted towards Pharaoh sending the Jews out, after all, what would any normal sovereign choose to do when his country is slowly and systematically being destroyed? God steeled Pharaoh's resolve, causing that the plague shouldn't interfere with his decision-making process and allowing him to continue expressing his true desire. I guess, like, potentially, but it seems to me like God still steeled his resolve. And once again, like, I think there's two things going on. So if I grant your reading, I find that I'm in a situation where I can't translate that out philosophically to what we know about how minds and emotions work. Namely, I don't know if it makes sense to talk about will as like a quantifiable thing like that, or resolve for that matter. Moreover, I don't know how to rate, for example, the will to concede against the will that honors some previous will, and wherein does this previously existing true desire reside? It seems like Pharaoh desired something else more. Why is the desire to offset the plague, or to not suffer the consequences of God's wrath, not his true desire? It seems like your true desire is the one you act upon. I don't know what other metric you would have for judging which desire is true and which one is false. If you believe one has a soul and true nature, it works fine. But you don't if you're an ancient Israelite, Brooks. You see the problem? There is no knowledge in the grave for ancient Jews. They're not dualists. They don't believe that way.
God kept making his heart hard again.
He was not complying God wish you because the Pharaoh did not believe in the God of Israel. He did not believe it.
Except for the times that he said he would.
No. Pharaoh did believe in the God of Israel. They all believe, like even the Romans believed in the God of Israel. I mean, well, I don't know if they believed in the God of Israel, but they treated the God of Israel as if the God of the Jews was real. The Romans were not particularly skeptical, at least in terms of practice. Like a lot of philosophers were, obviously. A lot of people were independently skeptical of the existence of the gods and so on and so forth. But culturally, the Romans acknowledged the gods of all of the peoples they conquered. They would convey them, their statues and their things as like a symbol of to declare that they have conquered and assimilated the gods of the peoples they've defeated in battle.
And have you considered the fact that people lie? That's the thing. We could go back and forth, but people lie.
Okay, I feel like I think that you're right that people lie, and I think right now you're lying to yourself. I appreciate you coming on. Yes, you are. I appreciate you coming on here. You need to reread the verse. You're just telling yourself that it's being interpreted wrong, but yet there's no justification for that, other than you don't want to believe the more literal interpretation and the way that's clear and internally consistent.
Hold on, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to sit here and allow you to tell me what I'm getting wrong when you clearly have you can not believe in God. I don't care whether or not you believe in God, but I'm not going to sit here and let you tell me what I got wrong because I know this stuff better than you do. You
it doesn't show. Maybe you just need to work a little harder on that then.
Well, thank you, Naomi Chance. I appreciate that.
Because if you either you know more than I do and you're just really bad at communicating it, or you're lying again that you know more than me.
Come on. Yeah, you can't just. Man, I'm tripping up my words. Sorry.
It's okay. I just take a deep breath, reread the verse.
Okay. Anyways, let's see. He had some thoughts afterwards. I'm curious where he went with that. Let's go here.
Okay.
We're not going to go through the whole thing. It's 18 minutes long.
So,
it's very quiet.
I don't script these things. I never script these things. It's usually just off the cuff because I like doing that. It's a freeing structure, but
this is low-hanging fruit, but the caller's being incredibly condescending. I agree, but like the caller's also like frankly incompetent, so I would tend to adjust my tech according to that as well. Like if the person was, if this was like Jordan Peterson doing this, like no mercy, but this is just some kid, like he could be a teenager for all we know.
Well, less than 2 days ago, at the time of
we'll boost the volume a little bit.
Video, I debated Hunter Avallone on his YouTube channel or on Twitch. It was over about a Pacific reading over.
We'll look at that in a second, Brooks.
And
thank you for that.
And it was just generally over about religion. So it was a frustrating and irritating experience to talk to a guy like that who's looking for just sound bites to make himself look good and intellectually impressive to a bunch of essentially people who are in their teens and their early 20s.
Buddy,
and, it was
come on.
It was frustrating because it was hard to get. It was like talking to a brick wall, and I can't penetrate a brick wall. And
look,
admittedly, I didn't do a great job. Like
you did a terrible job. Here's the deal. Here's the deal. Okay.
Stumbling over my.
I've seen Hunter is on point in this one. This is a very easy conversation to have. I've seen my share of Hunter Avallone panels and debates where he contributes nothing, where he's just completely out of his depth. He can't acknowledge it. He can't learn. He can't have any grace in terms of how he interacts with his interlocutor, his opponent. and he flips out, and it's embarrassing. It's like watching a child have a tantrum. It is not hard to beat Hunter Avallone in a debate on anything, unless you've really failed to prepare. You've really failed to prepare, or your thesis is absurd, so you can't. And it seems like both were at play here. So I don't think you can... Saying that Hunter was playing it up for an audience of naive children is just silly. This is... The argument made by this person was an argument that would only be received well by naive children. It was bad. It's just very bad.
My words
I agree, Sirius. The more he talks, less bad I feel for him. It's very arrogant. We'll give him a couple seconds to dig this hole.
I just felt like I was talking really fast, and I wasn't clear with my point, but I got my point. But I got my point across. I got what I wanted to say out in the end.
Did you? I didn't hear you say anything really.
It wasn't productive and didn't go where I thought it would go. So with these with the type of culture on the internet and the type of debates that they have, these are very verbal and just free-form debates. It's about who can be the quickest, who can be the wittiest, who can make a quick comeback.
All right.
And
ooh, whale.
It's just not. It's not a good way to learn. It's not.
Okay. Do we have timestamps?
Challenge yourself.
Oh my God! All right. Let's jump 10 minutes in. Let's see if he says anything interesting.
It's just a barrier to grander ideas, as that you're just more so furthering misconceptions and false ideas and false notions. So,
all right.
And the best way to only combat this is just more so on the individual level and understand that.
Okay. You talked enough. Let's see here. Brooks found something interesting. Let me make that bigger. Okay. So here's an actual article from the Torah.com, it looks like, on this question. The ethical problem of hardening Pharaoh's heart. It seems unethical for God to deny Pharaoh free will and then punish him for his actions. Rashi, Maimonides, and Maimonides. Maimonides. If it's Maimonides, so it'd be Maimonides, I think. Maimonides, I'm going to go with that. Rashi, Maimonides, and Maimonides all struggle with this problem, and each assumes that even Pharaoh deserves to be treated fairly. Maimonides is super interesting, by the way. Whether the Hebrew Bible is a philosophical text or not has been debated, but in this piece I wish to read it as if it were one, especially as the text is read through the lens of Jewish medieval commentators. I've got a number of issues with this, primarily because there is actually a lot of transformation in Jewish thought between, let's say, the recovery of the Old Testament books by Josiah and whatever medieval refers to. I guess, well, time of Maimonides. This is not because I accept... There we go. Oh, good, okay. This is not because I accept the mythic origins of the Torah as a single document dictated by God to Moses. Rather, it is because my quote-unquote text, as it were, is less the Bible per se and more the ways readers grapple with some of the issues it raises. Good. All right. Thank you, Brooks. This is a good article. In particular, philosophical issues, in this case, the question of ethics. Plagues... Pharaoh's hard heart in its literary context. Plagues as motivation to allow Israel to leave. The Exodus narrative arguably begins with Exodus 3:16, when God informs Moses, still in the wilderness of Midian, that God has heard Israel's cry, will take them out of Egypt, and will bring them to a land flowing with milk and honey. Sounds sticky. As a prelude to the event, God says to Moses, "Yet I know the king of Egypt will not let you go without a strong hand. So I will stretch out my hand and smite Egypt with various wonders which I will work upon them. After that he shall let you go." God's warning to Moses that Pharaoh will not listen seems quite plausible. Why would the king of the most powerful nation on earth agree to liberate his slave population merely because a turncoat Egyptian asks him to? God's quote-unquote knowledge of Pharaoh's response and solution is equally reasonable. God will bring about wonders that will cause enough suffering in Egypt that Pharaoh will grant Moses' request. These verses do not imply that God wants anything more from Pharaoh than to simply liberate Israel. The function of the plagues becomes problematic in the following chapter when God adds a new explanation for them. And the Lord said to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the marvels that I have put within your power. I, however, will stiffen his heart so that he will not let the people go. Viewing this verse as a reformulation of Exodus 3:19, we now learn the source of God's quote-unquote knowledge of Pharaoh's recalcitrance. God will make Pharaoh unable to liberate Israel so that, quote-unquote, the plagues can continue. This "so that" is an important part of the verse because it essentially rewrites Exodus 3:20. The plagues are now more than merely a tactic to overcome Pharaoh's stubbornness. They are arguably a centerpiece of the entire episode, the centerpiece of the entire episode, rather. In almost every instance in which God hardens Pharaoh's heart, the verse includes the clause, "so that," "in order that," "to show that," "to make known," or "shall know." Both the plagues and the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, which seem to be inextricably intertwined, are now given pedagogical value. That means they're educational. So the purpose of the plagues is to make a demonstration to educate the people, presumably the Israelites. Unpacking the problem of God's hardening Pharaoh's heart. Most readers are familiar with the problem. How is it fair of God to, quote, harden Pharaoh's heart against the plagues and then punish Pharaoh for his obstinacy? Why did I read a quote? Oh, no, that's a smudge on my screen. It's not a... Yeah, never mind. No quotes. But allow me to unpack this a little more. For the sake of this philosophical analysis, the reader must, quote-unquote, accept three distinct propositions. Fairness, okay. Equality of all humans. The Bible assumes all humans are created in the image of God, even as some later traditions may subvert that claim, with free will, and all thus have the capacity to repent for their sins. I don't think this "with free will" line is actually implicit anywhere in the Old Testament. I think that's an error. I don't know that the writers lacked the notion of free will, but I don't know that this exists. And all those have the capacity to repent for their sins. In other words, no ontological distinction between Israelite and non-Israelite exists in the biblical narrative. So it depends on what he means by this. Does he mean, for the sake of philosophical analysis, just sign on to this line? How is it fair? One must also sign on to the idea of the equality of humans. Or is he saying that this is his read? Because if this is his read, I think that's presumptuous. If he's saying that that's what you need to say for it to be fair for God to harden Pharaoh's heart against the plagues and then punish Pharaoh for his obstinacy, I don't know if that's true either. Anyways. Holistic reading. The Bible should be read as a whole with a consistent message and no contradictions. Okay, good. So this is not his stance. This is the stance he's assigning to this. But I don't think this is true either. I don't think you need to accept these two propositions so far in order to sign on to this. You can think it's unfair and also believe humans are unequal and something unfair was done to somebody whose worth was less than Moses and the Israelites, let's say. Maybe God ranks Pharaoh lower. That doesn't necessarily mean he's not being kind of, scammed here, right? He's being given a choice. He's being threatened, and then he's being psychologically affected so that he can't respond appropriately to it, or won't respond appropriately to it if that tastes better going down. The notion of a holistic reading. I also don't think you necessarily need this. You can take. This doesn't follow. You can see there being inconsistencies and still stay within the context of the narrative of this particular text. It's unfair. Anyways, Bible should be read as a whole with a consistent message, no contradictions. I suggest that in principle, taking a source-critical approach and assuming that the Torah has no one approach to an issue or version of the story undermines or at least problematizes the reading of the text as a philosophical treatise, quote-unquote. A historical reading. The Bible should be understood outside the orbit of its own literary and theological worldview. If we were to view the Bible only as a literary document, limited in its historical and cultural scope, the quote-unquote problem of hardening Pharaoh's heart may be quote-unquote our problem, i.e. that of the modern reader, but not the Bible's, as Umberto Cassuto writes in Commentary on Exodus 56. If we read these passages according to their simple meaning and according to the reason of that period, and not in light of concepts that came into existence at a later epoch, We shall see in the final analysis that there is no problem or difficulty here and that everything is clear in the light of the original ideology of the Israelites. Okay. Instead, we will treat the Bible, the biblical text, as speaking to every generation and containing wisdom for any readership. Some would dub this constructive theology for working under this assumption. Once we accept these premises, God's hardening of Pharaoh's heart, which removes from Pharaoh the possibility of capitulation to God's will or repentance, understandably raises the question of ethical reciprocity and just deserts. I don't know why you would accept these premises, though. This doesn't present a problem for me. Okay. So this is Rashi's response. In his gloss on Exodus 7:3, Rashi states, "And I will stiffen," quote-unquote, "after Pharaoh acted wickedly toward me, and it was clear to me that the idolatrous nations do not have the sensitivity to repent with a whole heart. It is therefore good and just that God harden his heart in order to multiply his signs, he will recognize his might. This is the way of God. He brings calamity upon the nations in order that Israel hear and fear him. As it says, I wiped out nations, their corner towers are desolate." Okay, so this is just, this is essentially Hunter's reading. So we have in the rabbinical tradition, Hunter's read on this, which is the plain reading of it. God hardened Pharaoh's heart to have occasion to perform the plagues. Rashi's comment is made up of 3 parts: an observation about why God would harden Pharaoh's heart, proof that this fits with God's treatment of Gentiles in general. Okay, so we've got a denial of the first premise, which is the equality of human beings. An observation that God waited until the 6th plague to do this. Even so, in the first 5 plagues, it does not say, "And God stiffened Pharaoh's heart." Rather, Pharaoh's heart stiffened. That's interesting. So the heart of Pharaoh was hardened. 7th plague, thunder and hail. Let's see. First 5. 2nd plague, frogs. But when Pharaoh saw that there was a respite, he hardened his heart and would not listen to them as the Lord had said. 3rd plague, gnats. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened. How about that? Interesting. In the first part, Rashi claims that God knows due to Pharaoh's previous wicked behavior. Okay, I'm not super interested in this read. I am curious about this one here. When read as a whole, Rashi's comment tells us that Pharaoh only lost his ability to comply with God's demands after he had 5 chances to do so, and because God knew in advance that he wouldn't. This modifies the Talmudic dictum that God punishes the nations for the sake of Israel by adding the caveat that God does so only when they deserve it and have been given the opportunity to repent and avoid the punishment. That's a hypothesis. That's plausible. I don't think it's sufficiently motivated, though. I don't know why you would land on that read. It seems like you have to do a lot of dancing to get to that point. So this is Maimonides' read, or Maimonides' read. Moses, do not hold back from doing exactly what I say. Because of this, my hardening his heart. Also, remember to warn Pharaoh about the last plague, the killing of the firstborn, the plague that will eventually set you free. I will answer the question that all who read this narrative are wont to ask. If God hardens Pharaoh's heart, what is sin? There are 2 reasons, both of which are true. The first reason is that Pharaoh in his wickedness committed unwarranted acts of evil against Israel. As a result, his ability to repent was removed. There are many verses in Scripture that suggest that one can be judged by one's earlier actions. The second reason is that his sin was his unwillingness to liberate Israel, resulting in the first 5 plagues, where it only says Pharaoh's heart was stiffened or Pharaoh's heart was hardened. This exhibits that he did not want to liberate Israel to honor God. However, when the plagues intensified and he began to suffer from them, his heart was softened, and he was wont to free them because of the plagues and not in recognition of divine will. At that point, God hardened his spirit and strengthened his heart in order to make his name known. Okay. That's not super interesting to me. Maimonides. Yeah, all of these presume Hunter's read, which is not the interesting part of this. I was wondering if there was something a bit more philosophically interesting here. This is interesting, but more from a anthropological point of view. Yeah. No. Read Maimonides. Do I want to keep reading this? Okay, I'll go over it. Okay, we'll continue. Maimonides' gloss on Exodus 4:21 suggests that Moses might be upset at God's decision to harden Pharaoh's heart and might actually feel some sympathy for him. Implied here is that Moses will recognize Pharaoh's desire to liberate Israel and his inability to actualize that desire. While this could easily and justifiably result in Moses protesting the ethics of this unfolding event and the implications for Israel in the future, God warns him to not allow Pharaoh's suffering, his inability to change his mind, and God's torture, hardening his heart, to derail the process of Israel's liberation. I use the term torture, knowing it is understandably problematic and intentionally provocative. However, I think it suitably describes God's, quote, cruel and unusual, unquote, punishment, as understood by Maimonides for 2 reasons. Moses is warned not to have mercy on Pharaoh. God reminds Moses to tell Pharaoh. Okay, we saw this. Okay, so what is sin? The first reason is that Pharaoh in his wickedness committed unwarranted acts of evil against Israel. As a result, his ability to repent was removed. There are many verses in Scripture we saw that. The second reason is that his sin was his unwillingness to liberate Israel, resulting in the first 5 plagues. This exhibits that he did not want to live. Okay, we read this already. What was I missing? I think I went through all this. In Mishneh Torah, Maimonides very cogently elucidates free will as the foundations of repentance. Just as one sins willingly and knowingly, one must repent willingly and knowingly. Maimonides posits free will as the correlation between sin and repentance, but not without limits. He cites numerous examples, including both non-Israelites and Israelites, who were prevented from repenting because of their sinful behavior. Concluding in Laws of Repentance 6:2, all of them sinned willfully and deserve to be prevented from repenting. In his 8 chapters, he makes a similar argument. Then, according to this assumption, God requested that Pharaoh set them free, though he was compelled not to set them free. Then God punished him and destroyed him and his followers for not setting them free. This would have been an injustice and contrary to everything we have previously set forth. That is, the loss of free will is only a punishment resulting from free will, i.e. the continuous choice to act wickedly, and functions inside as well as outside God's covenant with Israel. According to this, the Exodus has a threefold purpose: to liberate Israel from bondage, to show non-Israelites the power of God, and to show the Israelites that the covenant they are about to enter, while based on reciprocity, includes the provision that God can remove Israel's ability to avert punishment through repentance. Third essential for Maimonides. As I understand Maimonides' point in this oblique passage, an individual may know that he or she cannot act in a certain way because God is preventing him or her from doing so. The punishment is a temporary erasure of free will. Here's the problem, though, and this is why it's just not very compelling. It's not compelling for the reason that the story begins with the revision of Exodus 3:19, so that God is telling Pharaoh in 4:21 that God will stiffen his heart so that he will not let the people go. I didn't see a really satisfactory rebuff of that in any of these people. It's interesting. I just don't think I don't think that the attempts to justify this are indeed anything but a cope. I think Hunter is correct on that point. They're copes of varying intensity depending on how invested you are in the coherence of the story. All right, I'm gonna go refill my water, and then we're going to look at the defensive pseudoscience video. I'll just be one moment. And this one's short, so we'll hopefully be able to do some interesting stuff with this one. Be one moment, folks. I just realized I had music playing, but I had muted the desktop so you couldn't hear me switching through videos because they autoplay. We're operating on all cylinders today, apparently. Oh, hey, Bailey, how you doing? I got some, I have some bad news for you, Bailey. I have some very bad news indeed. Hunter's read was correct, I'm sorry to say. If you want to come on and chat, be my guest. But, we can canvas what we've gone through. And you'll be giving me the views and not Hunter. That's a benefit right there.
Astrology.
Nope, you're not your turn yet. There we go. Was Bailey the one on the video with Hunter? No, Bailey's the one who challenged Hunter to a debate based on his performance in that. Although I wouldn't mind talking to that one too. That would be interesting. We'll give them a few minutes to catch up. No, not getting a reply there. Not seeing a response. Oh, maybe they left. Oh well. Anyways, Bailey, if you're there, I would like to chat. It might help you as some prep, because I think you're walking into a trap here. I don't think your position is defensible on this one. Alright, anywho. Pseudoscience. So this is by SchizoBailey, published 3 days ago. So deep in the existential crisis that I forgot to swear. Also, sorry about the clickbait. I don't actually defend pseudoscience in the video. So here are the timestamps. Intro, pseudoscience is important. Eurocentrism in science creates cognitive biases. Science is theories, and theories are helpful. Okay. Alright, well, this could be interesting. Let's see how it goes.
Telekinesis, feng shui, UFO sightings, germ theory, plate tectonics, and the existence of atoms. What do all these things have in common? They were at one point in time considered pseudoscience. The first 4 are still considered pseudoscience. Pseudoscience consists of theories that claim to be factual but are actually dismissed as false on the grounds that they have not yet been proven by...
Hang on. Wait a minute.
Common. They were at one point in time considered pseudoscience. The first...
Plate tectonics was considered pseudoscience? I don't think these were considered pseudoscience. I don't think we really had a notion of pseudoscience when these were forming... Like, who coined the term pseudoscience? Hang on. Pseudoscience, coin. No, I probably shouldn't type that. When was the term pseudoscience coined? Although the term has been in use since at least the 18th century, by James Petit Andrews in reference to alchemy, the concept of pseudoscience is distinct from real or proper science, seems to have become more widespread during the mid-19th century. Okay. French physiologist Francois Magendie in 1843 used the term pseudoscience to refer to phrenology. Okay. Plate tectonics. Okay. Plate tectonics. Pseudoscience? Oh, look at that. Huh. How about that? No, I am not signing up to your newsletter, but let's take a look at this. Okay. No, get on there. When continental drift was considered pseudoscience. I did not know that. That is bizarre. More than 100 years ago, a German scientist was ridiculed for advancing the shocking idea that the continents were adrift. How about that? But it was the Americans who came down hardest against continental drift, of course. A paleontologist called it Germanic pseudoscience and accused Wegener of toying with the evidence to spin himself into a state of auto-intoxication. He then produced his own cutout continents to demonstrate how awkwardly they fit together. It was geology's own equivalent of O.J. Simpson's glove. That's funny. What were the other ones? There was atomic theory regarded as that one's weird to me. Hang on. Atomic theory considered as pseudoscience. That one's bizarre to me. List of topics considered as pseudoscience. Okay, here we go. Earth sciences. No, physics. I'm not seeing... Because atomic theory, like, atomistic theories are just... I don't think they've ever been regarded as pseudoscientific. They're just debated. Like, is there a smallest indivisible particle that comprises matter, or not? I don't think the methodological assumption that there is has been taken as pseudoscientific. It's just been taken as something that you could argue about. Let's see here. So if I search atom. No, there's no reference in Wikipedia for it, and they've got a pretty long glossary. So we'll see. Maybe they'll produce a citation for this. We'll see. Oh, sorry. I'm looking at this over here. I'm scrolling through this right now, so you can see what I'm doing. Anywho.
The first four are still considered pseudoscience. Pseudoscience consists of theories that claim to be factual but are actually dismissed as false on the grounds that they have not yet been proven by science. Just because science can't prove a theory yet, does that mean we should assume that these theories are false until we find empirical proof for it? Karl Popper's falsifiability criterion states that for a theory to be scientific, it should be falsifiable, or capable of being tested and potentially proven false. According to Popper, then, the theory that black cats bring bad luck is unfalsifiable because how do you quantify an individual's baseline level of luck to calculate the influence that black cats have on the trajectory of said individual's fate? But just because science can't prove this theory yet, should we assume that this theory can never be proven by science? No, we shouldn't exclude the possibility that theories considered unfalsifiable currently can become falsifiable in the future. For example...
By the way, the premise of Escaflowne, which you haven't seen, is really good. Watch the series, not the movie. Is that Isaac Newton reincarnated in another universe and attempted to harness the power of fortune, which he believed was an actual natural force. It's really, really freaking weird, but it's a really good series.
Continental drift, which is the hypothesis that the Earth's continents broke apart and drifted across the ocean bed, was once considered unfalsifiable before we developed the tools and methods that we can use to empirically prove the theory. The last three items of the list I gave at the start of the video were later empirically proven to be true. When you encounter a theory that doesn't sound right that you can't prove yet, simply dismissing it as false or unfalsifiable disincentivizes us from trying to improve upon our scientific method so that we're able to prove whether or not it's true or false. In order to get an answer...
Yeah, that's something else too, Brooks. Feng Shui is not pseudoscience, it's a design method. It's more than a design methodology, no? I wouldn't say it's aspiring to be scientific, quote-unquote, but it does seem to... Whenever I hear it talked about, and I know very little about this, there are, like, principles or energies or something that are sort of invoked to justify, like, certain, spatial relations of objects and orientations and things like that. Like, it seems to be referring to something there that, for most people, is not. Something like that.
You must first ask a question, no matter how silly. Is the Earth flat?
About Feng Shui turning it into something magical or spiritual was essentially racism. Really? Interesting. So that's a more recent reinterpretation of it. Oh, I didn't know that. Interesting. Huh. Brooks, if you have any material on that, I am curious. That's interesting. I'm learning so much tonight. That's real. I've seen it. I saw it. I was in an airplane. I saw the edge.
So, as we know, in many cases pseudoscience was proven wrong by empirical science. Flat Earth theory is one of them, as well as the claim that we use just 10% of our brains. Given that the evidence is correct, it might be reasonable to believe these theories to be false, but we still mustn't exclude the possibility that the scientific effort exerted towards proving the theory has been insufficient. For example, the possibility that the methodology is flawed. But even if our methodology is perfect, does something being scientifically proven to be true mean that it's actually true? Well, what does it mean to scientifically prove something? What is science? Definitely not pseudoscience. Pseudoscience by definition fails to meet scientific standards. But we're the ones who made the scientific standards. We say that Greek mythology and astrology is made up, but we forget that science as a discipline is also made up. By who? White men, mostly.
wait.
Empiricism is the branch
There
of
we go.
epistemology that believes that knowledge primarily comes from sensory experience, such as direct observation. The Eurocentric bias in science creates the cognitive bias of scientism, which elevates empirical science and the scientific method as the sole reliable source of knowledge.
Hang on, I need to hear that again.
From sensory experience, such as direct observation. The Eurocentric bias in science creates the cognitive bias of scientism, which elevates empirical science and the scientific method as the sole reliable source of knowledge. This bias perpetuates an elitist and Eurocentric perspective that favors scientific explanations and overlooks subjective or non-quantifiable aspects of knowledge. It dismisses non-European perspectives as primitive or superstitious. If you do think that Western science is just more real than the science of other cultures, remember that each ancient culture individually developed different ways to calculate pi. We're using approximately the same brains to observe the same universe and to use the rules that we found to help us survive. We all did a pretty good job at keeping ourselves alive. Except when we tried to kill each other. When we dismiss theories on the grounds of that doesn't seem likely to happen, we fall prey to a cognitive bias because the validity of the theory is not affected by the believability of the...
Okay, what is... Hang on a sec, sorry. I'm going to review this section again. I apologize, but I'm going to pay very close attention to it, because I think there's something here that I disagree with a little bit.
Something. What is science? Definitely not pseudoscience. Okay. Pseudoscience, by definition, fails to meet scientific standards. But we're the ones who made the scientific standards. We say that Greek mythology and astrology is made up, but we forget that science as a discipline is also made up. By who? White men, mostly. Empiricism is the branch of epistemology that believes that knowledge primarily comes from sensory experience, such as direct observation. The Eurocentric bias in science creates the cognitive bias of...
Okay, so here's the fundamental problem here. So what counts as science is dependent upon what your understanding of the world is, and sort of like your level of sophistication with respect to a certain, like, the development of your methodology. So there is a certain presentism to it, where what is science, for example, for Pythagoras, would not be regarded as science by someone who's deeply indebted to Pythagoras a couple thousand years later. So science alters itself as it learns about the world. The people who are proposing, for example, metaphysical theories in present day, of a kind with what examples did like I don't did like Ayurvedic medicine say, that runs contrary and outside of established methodologies and does not justify itself adequately by an alternative methodology. So something like that is appropriate to regard as pseudoscientific, because they're not living in a different world. The people who promulgate it are embedded in the same social systems largely, even if they're geographically displaced. We're unified by different communication technologies. We're getting verified at the same universities typically, or we're using the same types of credentials to bolster our credibility to a lay audience. So I don't think that's specifically Eurocentric in and of itself. It can be incidentally Eurocentric in the sense that there appears to be a heavy European slant in terms of the recorded foundations of the principles underlying a lot of scientific research, but it's also not. That's not really satisfying though as a critique. What you would have to show is that there is an unjust onboarding of specifically cultural presumptions as against those of another one that have some kind of equivalence on some scale. You'd have to show that this can do the same thing as this one, and show its reasons and justify that its explanation is better or equal to this one. It's not enough to simply wave at, well, there's another methodology that people claim somewhere seems to help them or something like that. You need to have, it needs to generate knowledge, right?
Or non-quantifiable aspects of knowledge. It dismisses non-European perspectives as primitive or superstitious. If you do think that Western science is just more real than the science of other cultures, remember that each ancient culture individually developed different ways to calculate pi. We're using approximately the same brains to observe the same universe and to use the rules that we found to help us survive. We all did a pretty good job at keeping ourselves alive, except when we tried to kill each other. When we dismiss theories on the grounds of that doesn't seem likely to happen, we fall prey to a cognitive bias because the validity of the theory is not affected by the believability of that theory. What we believe is likely to happen is rooted in a subjective impression of what science is, rather than what science actually is. And this subjective impression of what constitutes as valid knowledge is shaped by scientism. An example of this cognitive bias is people's beliefs about what happens after death, which is something that none of us have experienced and thus none of us know anything about. Concepts like heaven, hell, or reincarnation are considered silly
That's funny.
by some, while the theory of nothingness, everything goes dark, is considered more scientific and more widely believed in. We literally know nothing about what happens after death. When we pick a side or form any sort of opinion on this topic, it can only root from cognitive biases.
Well, no, not necessarily, right? Like, it may be that the state of our scientific understanding of the things which give rise to experience and cognition and stuff like that we've identified the physical structures responsible for these things, and therefore to propose that the things which they give rise to persist after the absence of the mechanism by which they emerge, that's a statement in need of additional justification. Whereas it's a pretty intuitive response that take away the mechanism that generates the phenomena, and the phenomena goes away. That's not identical to a statement of you can frame that negatively, so it's simply saying like, oh, okay, maybe it's possible, maybe the phenomena somehow persists, maybe it can somehow be recreated, maybe there's something about minds or humans or whatever that can be sort of stored and saved somewhere after the organs fail. But I know not of these, and when I imagine the absence of a sensation, my analogy is darkness. If I lose an eye, if I cover my eye, it's black. If I cover both eyes, it's a whole lot blacker. If I cover my ears and upset their function, I can't hear things, and so on and so forth. And I'm not really on board with that line of argumentation so far. I think the conjecture that there's an afterlife is itself a positive conjecture that stands in need of some kind of justification. I don't think you need a justification to be skeptical about it. And I think the argument would be that being skeptical about the positive proposition is more scientific. Not that a positive statement about the nature of the divine or the afterlife or things like that is more scientific, because obviously that's outside the purview of natural science.
Dismissing a theory as false or unscientific on the grounds of lacking empirical science isn't helpful, because most of science was developed through theoretical frameworks rather than direct observation. Theories in particle physics, for example, such as string theory, may lack empirical evidence currently, but they have value in that they challenge existing paradigms and drive scientific progress. And tickle my brain, which I like. But even when science is completely empirical knowledge still isn't a source of objective truth. It's rare for science to have absolute certainty in the causal links that it draws between observations.
Well, the main thing, though, is that empirically observed principles are public, in a sense, that other people can test them, because they're empirical, because you receive the information through your senses. You're receiving the information from a world supposedly hold in common. That doesn't make them purely objective. Like, you can have entire communities of people that have some kind of intellectual slant where they interpret empirical information in a particular way that's misleading. They process the information wrong, maybe. And of course, we're all limited by the fact that we are a specific type of organism in a particular location of the world where certain things obtain that may not obtain elsewhere. But insofar as anything is objective, the purpose to an empirical framework is precisely that. The source of the information, the source of the knowledge, comes from between subjects and not from within a subject. I'm not self-reporting a phenomenal experience of God. I'm saying, hey, look, I've found a device in the desert near a crater that seems to be made of an element, we're looking under a microscope, that is not found elsewhere on this earth. This is kind of interesting. Here, you look at this. That's not on our periodic table, right? Huh. Maybe this is from outer space. There you go. That's a hypothesis. Like that's how that works.
And theories. When Newton saw an apple fall from a tree, he theorized about the gravitational force, and we just went along with it because his theories are consistent with our observations and it makes sense. He just observed what happened and theorized about why it happened. And most of science is just this. But just because his
No. That's a theory of gravity. That's not... Anyways.
theories make sense doesn't mean that there aren't other possible explanations for the apple falling. For example, invisible fairies, or maybe apples of free will and prefer to be on the ground. We went along with Newton's theories because as far as we know, it describes our physical world accurately. That is until we developed equipment that was precise enough to allow us to observe what goes down in the quantum scale.
The single electron leaves as a particle, becomes a wave of potentials, goes through both slits, and interferes with itself to hit the wall like a particle. It goes through both slits, and it goes through neither. And it goes through just one, and it goes through just the other.
So we discover that the entire field of classical physics fails to accurately describe and predict quantum phenomena. Then we have to come up with new theories like string theory or loop quantum gravity, whatever that is, to try and unify classical physics and quantum physics into a single framework. And this is constantly happening. Every time we learn more about the world, there's a...
She's speaking really fast and it's frustrating. Did she say she thinks all science is just observation? Hang on, let me look at the transcript. She needs to speak more slowly. It's very difficult to follow. Maybe she's just nervous. I don't know. Like, is that what she said? Hang on, let's see. So if I go back to 4 minutes and 7 seconds.
Which I like. But even when science is completely empirical, empirical knowledge still isn't a source of objective truth. It's rare for science to have absolute certainty in the causal links that it draws between observations and theories. When Newton saw an apple fall from a tree, he theorized about the gravitational force, and we just went along with it because his theories are consistent with our observations and it makes sense. He just observed what happened and theorized about why it happened. And most of science is just this. But just because his theories make...
Yeah, no. No, we knew that things fall down before Newton. This is frustrating. This is deeply frustrating. Okay. Let's press on.
Just the other.
So we discover that the entire field of classical physics fails to accurately describe and predict quantum phenomena. Then we have to come up with new theories like string theory or loop quantum gravity, whatever that is.
Sith Yu, who famously doesn't understand anything that's said, says I'm getting most of what she's saying. I don't think she's speaking fast at all. You're crazy then.
Try and unify classical physics and quantum physics into a single framework. And this is
also, weren't you in my comments earlier saying COVID wasn't real? I don't know what to tell you, dude.
Happening. Every time we learn more about the world, there's a chance that our old theories about the world are proven wrong. But even if we could experience infinity...
looks like Bailey wants to come on. Cool. Still, I'll bring you on after this segment. Should be done very soon.
In every aspect of the world that we experience is still local to our subjective reality only. We think of truth as something that is universal and objective.
Wait, hang on, wait a sec.
Infinity in every aspect of the world that we experience is still local to our subjective reality only. We think of truth as something that is universal and objective. Asking if something is true assumes that there is an objective reality for us to observe. We experience an illusion of the existence of an objective reality because most of us agree upon the things that we see. If everyone on the planet believes that birds are real because we can see them and touch them, does that mean we know that birds are real? No, because belief is not equal to knowledge. There's still the possibility that we have different definitions of what birds are, that we see different versions of birds that we both define as birds, or that we're collectively hallucinating. We'd never know whether or not birds are objectively real, because we don't know whether or not the reality we observe is the objective reality. Popular thought experiments online, like we're all brains in jars, or we're living in a simulation, or my red is different from your red, or that I'm the only one who sees birds and everyone's just lying to me, are all just people questioning whether or not there really is an objective reality to perceive beyond our subjective reality. We question it because we will never know, because we're trapped in our subjective reality, and technically anything that we perceive is still a part of it. So is it possible to know anything?
Oh. No, we share the common predicament of being in a common locality at the scale of the planet. But that doesn't mean we're trapped in our subjective reality vis-a-vis human knowledge in general. The reason why we use empirical methodologies is because it overcomes the limitations of our independent senses. At the very least, we can say that humans properly equipped can yield these results when they interact with the world in this way. So we're not we're still trapped in the subjectivity of being human, but that isn't necessarily a problem. That's a problem if by knowledge you mean having the position of God or something.
I believe not. And that stance aligns with philosophical skepticism. Most people are selectively skeptical about pseudoscience, like astrology, but the same people are often not skeptical of the claims of knowledge they find on the internet or in their textbooks that's maybe based on a study riddled with p-hacking, and that again is due to the tyranny of scientism. Anyway, philosophical skepticism rejects even knowledge claims that seem like common sense, because it suggests that beliefs can never become knowledge, and we shouldn't believe nor disbelieve any proposition but keep an open mind, because no matter how certain you are about a given belief, it can still be proven wrong, and the only thing we're certain of is the absolute uncertainty of it all. I'm not telling you to go about the rest of your life questioning whether or not you have hands, because even if there might not be a universal truth in the philosophical sense, in the context of our lives where knowledge serves a functional purpose to optimize our happiness, there is such a thing as an objective statistical fact. Empiricism is consistent with the way we interact with the world. We collect data from observing the world and use the data to predict trends to inform our decisions. There's a reason empiricism is the branch of epistemology that they teach in schools, because it serves our interests as a humanity. Because knowledge advises all of our decision-making.
Because it serves our interests as a humanity. No, empiricism is taught in schools, not because it serves our interests as a humanity, but because it seems to serve the progress of science. Arguably, it's led to a level of technological sophistication that has equipped us to destroy humanity and all of its interests. The reason why is simply because that's how science is done right now. That's all. And it's not even taught particularly well.
It might be in our best interest to label claims that are not supported by sufficient empirical proof as misinformation. However, it's also important to be ready to apply that same skepticism to our current beliefs. All of us are prone to mistaking belief for knowledge and to hastily dismiss theories that don't align with our current belief system. And that's a problem because our belief systems are rooted in cultural norms and biases that perpetuate systemic inequalities. The point of science is to continuously discover new things that challenge our old theories, not to use our old theories that are very potentially faulty to refuse new possibilities.
What?
The point of science is to continuously discover new things that challenge our old
new
theories.
New things, not new theories. Okay. That challenge your old theories. Well, they don't need to challenge your old theories. In fact, typically, like the problem with theoretical paradigms is that they don't really give you the tools to transition between paradigms. This is one of the reasons why discoveries and novel interpretations tend to cause paradigmatic shifts in science. This is the whole point of Thomas Kuhn's my brain's not working. The theory of scientific revolutions. The structure of scientific revolutions. There we go. That's the entire basis for that, and arguments about whether or not, for example, revolutions in science are are common, or whether or not there are, like, for example, like long stretches of normal science, whether some theories tend to just obtain for a very long period of time. Like, we've had a quick succession of theoretical shifts, of paradigmatic shifts in science, but there's nothing to say that one won't just sit stable for a very long period of time. Maybe we just find one that seems to work for most of what we're able to do.
Is not to use our old theories that are very potentially faulty to refuse new possibilities. Scientific progress is only made possible with empiricism. Without the sense of certainty that
That's not true. That's clearly not true. We don't transition between paradigms on purely empirical grounds, and you could probably carry older systems of physics and older theories pretty far, farther than we've taken them, because we don't switch when we've exhausted a theoretical paradigm. We switch when a new, more compelling one introduces itself.
Empiricism offers us, we wouldn't get anywhere. Because to want to know more about the world, you must first believe that knowledge exists and is obtainable. Empiricism is not the enemy of, or mutually exclusive with, skepticism.
No, you don't, because you can have a pragmatic understanding of knowledge, whereby knowledge doesn't exist as a thing in the world. What we call knowledge is a proposition or an understanding to which the facts of your experience and your communication with other human beings sort of gravitates towards. Charles Peirce, for example, he has a theory of I forget the exact wording, but for him a fact, or something like a fact, I'll have to double check, is essentially something that our discourse will lead inexorably towards as we develop it. As we like continue, the truth of the thing is going to be what we end up. The truth of a hypothesis, or I guess a factual statement is one that our language and our activity sort of drives towards, and it kind of makes itself the fact of our. I don't know. I'm talking right here. Ambrose is going to kill me for butchering that. We'll return to that later.
My favorite thing about humans is that we try to find out stuff. We spent decades trying to send humans into space, and although there's a huge incentive to do this in terms of financial and national interests, I'd like to believe that at least some people working on the space projects were doing this just because they wanted to see what it's like out there, and to take a selfie with 4 billion people at once. It's cool to want to know things, even if we're too stupid to know whether or not we can ever know anything at all. And birds aren't real.
People lie.
Okay, I feel...
That was funny. Hang on, okay, so... Facts as guiding principles. Here we go. Page 30. I annotated this like a madman a little while ago. So you can see here, dear God. It's worrying that I retain it so poorly. 30, okay. The class of modifications of consciousness, this is from Some Consequences of Foreign Capacities by Charles Sanders Peirce. The class of modifications of consciousness with which we must commence our inquiry must be one whose existence is indubitable, and whose laws are best known, and therefore, since this knowledge comes from the outside, which most closely follows external facts, that is, it must be some kind of cognition. Here we may hypothetically admit the second proposition of the former paper. I forget which one it was. According to which there is no absolutely first cognition of any object, but cognition arises by a continuous process. We must begin, then, with a process of cognition, and with that process whose laws are best understood and most closely follow external facts. This is no other than the process of valid inference which proceeds from its premise A to its conclusion B, only if, as a matter of fact, such a proposition as B is always or usually true when such a proposition as A is true. It is a consequence, then, that of the first two principles whose results we are to trace out, that we must, as far as we can, without any other supposition than that the mind reasons, reduce all mental action to the formula of valid reasoning. Hang on. Give you 1 sec. Guiding Principles 113. I see, okay. So this is in the fixation of belief. The subject could hardly be treated, however, without being first limited, since almost any fact may serve as a guiding principle. But it so happens that there exists a division among facts, such that in one class are all those which are absolutely essential as guiding principles, while in the others are all which have any other interest as objects of research. Oh, here we go. Here we go. I think this is what I'm looking for. That which determines us from given premises to draw one inference rather than another is some habit of mind, whether it be constitutional or required. The habit is good or otherwise according as it produces true conclusions from true premises or not, and an inference is regarded as valid or not without reference to the truth or falsity of its conclusions especially, but according as the habit which determines it is as such as to produce true conclusions in general. Where is the section on defining a true conclusion? Hang on. Here we go. I'll have to return to this. This is too dense to flip through. Purse is really interesting though. Highly recommend. All right, we'll bring on Bailey. Let's see here. Okay, I've sent them my Discord, so we'll bring them on. We'll pull them into the server too, in case they have trouble with that. Now we wait. Good night, Naomi. Ah, here we are. Excellent. Okay. I'll give him a call. Hello, hello. I can't quite hear you if you're trying to speak. And I'm... Hello? Ah, there you are. Give me 1 quick second. I need to grab some water. I just gotta catch my throat. I'm about to start hacking my lungs out, so just bear with me a second. You can hear me, right? Hello?
Okay, there we go.
There we go. Give me 1 quick second, okay?
No problem.
Alright. All right. Just pop my earphones in, then I'll be able to hear you again.
Hello.
First of all, we haven't spoken before. Nice to meet you. Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name's SchizoBailey on Twitter. Me and President Sunday have had a couple of exchanges on Twitter before. I hope you know that every exchange we've had has been in good fun.
Well, I had no idea about this, but I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad you were enjoying yourself at least.
Okay. Twitter is just inherently combative, and people get joy out of being combative.
That's fine. I haven't remembered anything if you offended me at some point, so we're all good.
Okay, I haven't remembered anything as well, so
perfect.
Glad was that I got a
good. We can be friends then.
Exactly.
So right off the bat, I got some bad news for you. We went over, and maybe you saw it already because you were in the chat briefly. We went over yeah, we went over the debate between what's his face? Who's the person he was arguing with? That kid?
I met him recently. Let me have a check. I think it's like Zonic or something. He's a Christian turning.
Yeah, I gathered.
Something else like I want to say a Lutheran, but I know it's not a Lutheran.
Oh,
it's like some other denomination of Christianity that's more
Calvinist
than Christian. Maybe I'm not familiar enough with it. I'm an atheist, so anything that it's all just the same bucket of trash to me.
So
to be honest.
I don't watch Hunter Avallone because I don't like his stuff very much. I don't think much of him generally, but unfortunately in this particular case, maybe he's historically abysmal when it comes to textual interpretation, but he seems to be on the money here, and not just in terms of intuitive readings of the text in English. We looked up some glosses on medieval Jewish reads of it, in particular Risha Naminides, I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that name, and Maimonides. And they agree with that reading. And so when I forgot his name already. When our denominationally ambiguous friend says that he's going against the history of biblical scholarship, he is very, very much incorrect. It seems like the history of biblical scholarship assumes that Pharaoh's will is in some sense being directly affected by God, and that this is what causes him to respond unproductively to the threats of the plagues, and this is in fact part of God's plan, because he wants him to not be receptive, so that he can use the spectacle of the plagues to make an example for the remembrance of the Israelites later on.
Yeah. So as I was so I will admit that when I tweeted that out, I was kind of just, before work, sort of like, Hunter's having another religious debate, and not giving this guy the time of day. And I find that pretty annoying, because I've seen a couple of religious debates, and even as an atheist, I just find it kind of, drab and not very productive.
Oh, they're very boring. They're painfully boring, and it's a shame too, because like the subject matter is actually really interesting. There's no reason for it to be that boring, except you have somebody bringing on a bunch of really insecure people who haven't spent any time trying to understand this stuff seriously. They're using it as kind of a therapy because they've grown up with it, and the threat of it being destabilized just causes them to react negatively to a whole bunch of things.
Right. It's like children having their favorite
and then
toy,
you have and then you have
and stuff.
And then on the other hand, you have some asshole who's just not affected at all, and gets money for being cruel to those people. So I don't find any of that particularly compelling or enjoyable. Hunter is an eminently uncharming person, so I don't know how on earth he succeeds of all people at doing it. But
well, I'm glad we agree there. That's the thing. So after this whole funny, come on, debate me, but I'll block you, and all this kerfuffle, I did have a look more into the story of Exodus and Bible, and I was operating on the opinion that the Old Testament and maybe the New Testament, I'm not too sure, was more in line with the concept of free will. So I realize if we're ever going to have a debate on this thing, which I don't think we're going to do, because number one, I don't think I'm qualified enough to talk about this, but there is somebody who is going to talk to Hunter apparently after he's been dodging his debates.
Who's that?
For inspiring philosophy. I believe he's a Christian.
I know who that is. Inspiring philosophy is an utter boob. He has no idea what he's talking about. He's one of the most incompetent philosophical thing. I don't even want to call him philosophical thing. His entire thing is basically just to use the same kind of woo-woo quantum mechanics talk that spirit science uses in order to justify things like substance dualism, or to make certain parts of scripture that seem to contradict our scientific understanding of the world seem plausible in some respect. It's incredibly he's incredibly bad faith. He's incredibly cowardly. He flees debates with competent people on the regular, unless they are very, very tightly constrained. Just awful. So this is not a more qualified person talking to Hunter. If Hunter, I sincerely hope Hunter. I sincerely wish Hunter well in that debate, because inspiring philosophy is a cancer.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Well, I admittedly I don't know enough about this guy. I do know that debate is happening after inspiring philosophy has been going after debate for a while. Hunter's been blocking. So, and we will whatever you think.
If that happens, we will eat well that night, friends.
Yeah. So when I was looking into the story, I was going off the presupposition that the Old Testament was more in line with the concept of free will, and I thought that Hunter's interpretation of God using God magic to make the Pharaoh act against his own free will was a contradiction, but I don't think that is. But there are like multiple examples within the Bible that do show free will being so free will isn't explicitly explored in the Bible. Like there is no free will, quote unquote, control F, looking that up. But there are like I know one of them was I believe in Genesis. I could be wrong. Where it's that, and it's dealing specifically with the concept of anyone can get into the kingdom of heaven if they redeem themselves.
Here's the kingdom of heaven. That's not going to be in Genesis, but here's the fundamental problem with invoking free will to explain some part of the Bible, especially in the Old Testament. It gets a little bit more amenable later on. But when you're talking about free will, you're talking about a bifurcation of things in a rather interesting way. You are saying that human beings have a decision-making capacity. We have some kind of faculty that allows us to choose things, right? But then in addition, this choosing ability is in some sense unconstrained. In some respect, it is undetermined by something on the outside of it, and that's a very specific philosophical proposition, that human beings have some aspect of themselves that is in some sense distinct from the world and is capable of acting according to a causality independent of it. So when you're talking about like most kinds of determinism, for example, will run something like this: the history of your organic history in the world, because it causes all of the events that led up to this event, and because the events that led up to this event are what are responsible for you having the certain like inputs that make you choose this as opposed to this. Therefore, your will is determined. There's still a process that can be described in human terms as a choice taking place. There's still decisions. There's still quote unquote willing going on, but it's not independent of the causality of the world. You have to have like a super specific understanding of how the world works to even talk about free will. So when we're talking about like the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, for example, for an ancient anybody, that wouldn't necessarily represent an affront to Pharaoh's free will, because there is no separate thing called Pharaoh's will. There is simply the heart of Pharaoh that decides and its decision has been motivated from without. In that case, to be other than it would have been, like any other event in the world, like the river goes this way, but I put a dam and now it flows that way, and it's as simple as that. It's amenable to free will discourse at a certain level because we can retroactively go back with a more sophisticated understanding of psychology and the relationship between the world and our minds and whatnot, and say, well, maybe this was going on, right? Maybe this goes along, maybe this maybe this fits with the language of this passage. Maybe we can make these things mesh together. But there's a difference between saying that something is compatible and saying that the author had this in mind. And if the theory that gives rise to a notion of free will, for example, postdates the origin of that story or the way it's written, then you can't retroactively go back and say that's what the author intended. Does that make sense? Yeah.
No, I understand what you mean. So yeah, you can't have like a revisionist philosophical reading of the Bible. You kind of have to read it within the context of how it was written at the time. It's like, it reminds me of the constitutional literalist reading, even though that's more of obviously morally objectionable because law should be adapted over time. Stories, not so much.
You don't believe you should have a right to bear arms on your wall?
Well, I'm from Australia, so you can have the right to bear arms. You just have to go for a whole lot of regulations to get any sort of firearm, and even then, restricted. But no, I understand the sort of point you're meaning. I just found it interesting because I was going into it thinking that free will was a inherently Christian belief, but I realized that there are a lot of contradictions in that regard.
Well, I would say this. I think there is an argument to be made that our notion of free will is heavily inflected by Christian frames of reference, which really emphasize, for example, sincerity as a condition of salvation. It's not enough to be forced to say, I believe in the sacrifice of Christ. You have to actually believe in it. This is the basis of John Locke arguing for the separation of, not for the separation, but for the inappropriateness of a state magistrate, say, to try and legislate matters of private religion because that's outside of its competence. It can't tell you what the correct way to salvation is, or it can't force you to accept a certain creed sincerely. That's something you have to do for yourself. So there's a sense in which our language about free will is heavily motivated by the stakes in a world where your sincerity has like a real and dire existential importance. But in terms of it being embedded within the text itself, I think that's very different. And one of the things that happens is when you believe the text is actually written by God, you think it must be true. That sort of seems to follow, or at the very least, it must have something important to say, period, because God is not localized to a single point in time and space. And so it must be philosophically valid. And so you can sort of quest out and search for philosophically coherent interpretations of a text. But the interpretations of the text that you're making then aren't actually motivated by your reading of the text. It's your reading into the text principles from well outside of it. That seems to me what your friend was trying to do.
I feel like I was getting into that trap as well as I was watching that debate because again, I don't watch religious debates a lot, so it's like putting on the training wheels and relearning a lot of stuff. So it was interesting trying to see. Someone tried to, how would I explain it? It's like try to take all the wrappings of the Bible and trying to project it into one story, even though I think the Bible is written by multiple people across
many different people,
years.
And not just written by multiple people. Some of it comes from an oral tradition. We don't know how many hands it passed through to that point. It was also translated. A lot. We don't have the original text for any of this.
Just really quickly, that was another interpretation of God hardened his hearts. That it was that it was an oral interpretation that was taken literally. I don't know if that's valid or not.
Well,
Again,
what we were looking
can't
into,
stipulate that.
yeah.
I found it interesting.
Well, the Jewish tradition, the Hebrew language in it seems to indicate that what actually happened, as sort of they would read it, was not that Pharaoh was made obstinate, as in like an attitude of obstinacy was imposed on Pharaoh. I think it's the same difference, but instead what happened was God reinforced Pharaoh's earlier decision to produce the same outcome, as if he had simply made him sort of just insane and stubborn, right? So God didn't harden his heart in the sense of he made his heart rigid and non-functional. God hardened his heart in the sense of he scaffolded it. It's stronger. So his true desire, he pursued that despite the the ravages of the plagues. Now, for me, though, like, that's not particularly satisfying, because that's still an intervention that produces a decision contrary to the one he already made. So I don't find that particularly satisfying in the direction of the salvaging of Pharaoh's free will in that case. But yeah.
No, I was going to say, the way you framed that was really interesting, because it sounds like that it's God reinforcing the Pharaoh's already pre-chosen choice. So it would imply, so you made the argument before that even if you have all these factors coming in, there is still a potency of choice within there, limited or in whatever way you want to say, but there is still that choice within there. You could say that like that intervention of God is just reinforcing the choice that he's already made. And Hunter was trying to make the argument that the Pharaoh was acting in good faith and was willing to release the Israelites, which I don't think is the case.
Well, the reading of Nachmanides is that Pharaoh did choose to capitulate to Moses, but he did not do so to honor God. So when he said, "I have sinned against God," and he said, "I'll let your people go if the plague will stop." The bad faith was not that he wanted the plagues to stop and he was surrendering. The bad faith was the description of his state of mind and his beliefs about it. So he wasn't doing it. He wasn't doing it because he was actually yielding to God. He was doing it because
to stop the plagues.
Stop the plagues. Now, where I take some issue with this in terms of his true desires, I can understand that as like a further punishment of Pharaoh, but it doesn't seem like punishing Pharaoh was the primary motive given in the text itself. It seems like the motive was to create a spectacle for the sake of the Israelites' education later on. So, for me, that explanation doesn't particularly hold in addition, because when we're talking about true desires, I don't know how you rank desires in that fashion. And maybe you want to say that God is sort of capable of doing something that humans can't do, and is it capable of accessing the first person perspective of Pharaoh, and therefore can determine, oh, this has the mark of insincerity. But taking the text as it is, it seems a little bit strange to brute force someone into acting against their decision, and then to try to post hoc justify that as, no, that was actually their true desire, despite the fact that that's the thing they didn't act towards. That's a little bit odd. It seems like your true desire is ultimately that which you act for, and if you don't act for it, wherein lies the greater truthfulness of this desire? Like, where is this sitting somewhere? What makes this desire true and this desire less so? How do you quantify that, you know? It seems like you would look to the result.
Yeah. Sorry, this makes my brain hurt, because it's like
it's okay.
free will, ethics, and I forget what the other one is. Those sort of topics, like, I try to avoid those like a plague. I just try to steer clear of those, and I feel like to actually have a good reading of not just Exodus but the entire Bible, and it's because I feel like free will and determinism is the core disagreement there, and I am inclined to believe in determinism in a more scientific mystic sense. But I'm open to other interpretations. But I was just talking about within the context of the story, it sounded like the Bible was inconsistent with. The Bible was consistent with the concept of free will. Now I'm like, I'm not really sure where it is, and into this, it's like getting really into the weeds.
I also don't think it matters a whole lot, because one of the things I noted about the debate afterwards is even if you manage to salvage Pharaoh's free will in that story, most theodicies, that is, like attempts to reconcile the existence of harm and evil in the world with a loving God, they're operating at the scale of sin and evil and pains and sufferings existing at all in the first place, because you have supposedly an all-powerful being that created the universe and has chosen to order it in such a way as these things exist. And supposedly being all-powerful, we derive from that description that he could have chosen otherwise, so why?
Right.
And like it doesn't get at that point. Like the worst the highest stakes there are, was God a dick to innocent Pharaoh? And like the result you get to is inevitably like well probably, but Pharaoh was kind of a dick to the Israelites, so you know who.
It was a clash of kings, right? There were like three objectives. One was to free the Israelites, right, and establish his own kingdom. But there was ultimately to punish the Pharaoh and establish God as superior to the Pharaoh. That there was no man but God. You know? Yeah. So we are dealing with like two completely clashing, like egotistical people.
I'd be a little bit careful with the egotistical thing, because you run into some weird territory when it comes to talking about God in the first place, because of the role that God occupies in Jewish and Christian theology, where and we would describe it as egotistical, but the world in which we exist is also contained by the ego of God, so there literally isn't anything actually higher on the scale than God's ego. So when we talk about human beings being egotistical, that's petty. But when you're talking about potentially something equivalent to the universe itself being egotistical, you know, it seems like you just kind of go fair enough at that point.
Yeah, fair enough. You've created everything. I guess your ego is like more powerful.
Well, not even created everything, but is identical in some way with the being of everything as well. So it gets. And this is one of the reasons, again, why like it gets a little bit sketchy when you're philosophically reading into the text as well, because like that statement, you can make that mesh with the Old Testament text, but that's not in there. In fact, God self-refers in various different ways in different texts, depending on which one you're working with. If my understanding is correct, the initial description of the self-description of God in the plural in Genesis, which is sometimes taken by people as, I fairly naively, as being sort of an early occurrence of the Trinity, for example. God self-refers in the plural. God self-refers by names that are there's some cultural connectivity with other religious groupings that would be regarded as pagan or something, or as in some sense not a part of true religion from the perspective of later Christianity and things like that. So like it's taken as like a single, like it's tricky too, because when you're reading it in English, it seems like a single unitary thing, and you don't have access to the same like stylistic differences. The only differences you can really note are differences in genre. This one's clearly being poetical or metaphorical. This one's an account of someone's day-to-day life somewhere. This one's a letter, things like that. But you don't really get like the really subtle differences between what kinds of world and what kinds of experiences are implied by this particular writing in this particular language, and how much of that is just lost to us altogether, because we can't inhabit the mindset of somebody who's receiving this as part of an oral tradition thousands and thousands of years ago. Like when fundamentalists try to argue, well, it's like when fundamentalists try to argue that like Genesis is giving an accurate account of the origins of the world. like equivalent to a scientific account, what possible use could an ancient pre-literate nomad have for a scientific account of the world in that way? Why on earth would that even be a category of thing they care about? It wouldn't be. We didn't have a notion of science. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no historian career path that they can go down. Like, why are they noting all these things for God's interpretation? But yeah, I do find that story particularly interesting, because I do agree that the Bible verses are always very varying in genre, and in Exodus, I haven't read Exodus in a while. But I do like that the first few parts are about Pharaoh and God liberating them, right, through these brutal means, right? And then the second part of Exodus is all about the Israelites and how they've been liberated, right? But it's been liberated at what cost? Because they're trekking through the desert, looking for food, having no water, and they end up worshipping some golden, I think it's an ox or something, and it's Moses.
It's a calf. It's a golden calf.
Golden calf.
Yeah.
Right? So they start worshipping the golden calf because, I don't know, it gave them or something, I don't know. And then God's like, oh, I'm just going to kill them like I did with the Noah's Ark. And Moses is the one who's like, no, you can't do that. You remember the covenant you've made. And I don't know, I just found that really interesting in a way. I didn't really have a broader point. I was forgot the broader point I was going to make, to be honest.
The biggest problem with any free will conversation about this kind of thing, and this is what your friend is going to run up against if someone's paying careful attention, which I don't think Hunter was. Hunter is operating in a different mode. Is that fundamentally when you're talking about free will, you're talking about an understanding of the world in which there are two competing causalities. There is, because think about what it means. It's a little bit redundant otherwise. So free will. Well, what is your faculty of will, or what is willing? It's volition. It's choosing. It's the sight of freedom. What does it mean for the sight of freedom to be free? What does it mean for your decisions to be free from itself? Right? Like if your willing takes place in the world, regardless of whether or not it's determined in some rigid mechanical sense by previous actions, nonetheless, if that's what you are, you still become disposed to take certain actions, and you go through the same motions either way. It doesn't particularly matter whether or not there's some magical element to this, where despite the fact that you are responding to particular circumstances, and that your previous circumstances condition your response to these particular circumstances, well, there's some sense in which your experience and your decision-making capacity is magically apart from nature, such that you can't use the past experiences as an excuse. Like it seems like where you're operating with is a strong desire to want to justify ultimately punishments and things like that by a being that should know better.
Right.
Yeah. So
it's by a being that's going through who is actively going through the hard way.
It's
to obtain like the three principles is achieving no compromise at all to achieve those principles. Even though one of those principles is to just follow God, which is like, why should we prioritize that? Shouldn't it be number one, that people have the freedom to actually leave and worship you in their own right, you know?
Well, here's this is the problem you run into, because fundamentally free will debates of this type, where you try to argue for some kind of libertarian free will, or free will is divorced, is separate and sort of immune to the impact of the world, such that it can't refer back to it as the actual cause of its decisions and say, look, it wasn't my fault, I was made to by circumstances. That's something we want. It's an account of things that's satisfying if you're made comfortable by a world in which you have the security of, if this account of God is true, then I can live forever and have everything I want and have all these creature comforts and live in the sureness that all those other people with those weird and uncomfortable beliefs that make them do a bunch of stuff that I don't like them doing in proximity or in my view, they're wrong and I'm right, and I can sit satisfied about that and just put it out of thought and mind. The motive is never actually philosophical, because there's no real philosophical reason to arrive at it. There are philosophical reasons to desire it if you think that it's more pleasing to live in a world in which people can be held responsible for the things that they do, despite the fact that everyone is completely conditioned by what comes before in every decision they make, and there's no way outside of that. So I mean, like just anthropologically applying notions of free will to certainly the Old Testament are absurd. Even the New Testament, like it may be the case that there's just a fundamental injustice about the way the whole thing is written and thought through. Like, your sincerity is important, but what generates sincerity? Well, sincerity is going to be determined by a combination of conditioned feeling and true belief, and belief, and these are going to be themselves determined by your experience. Whether you're amenable to a given fact is based upon like who you've talked to, what you've learned, whether or not you learned it well, whether or not you had the adequate nutrition to learn it well. And then same with your sincerity. That's going to be determined on like the social pressures involved with it and all that stuff. Anyways, we're losing the connection. So,
oh, sorry.
Give it a couple seconds. We're in the red right now. It'll come back. I don't know how late you have to go. We're not going to go super long from now.
No, we don't have to go for too long. I'm green on my side.
Looks like we're back.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, but yeah, Hunter was right, but not because he's particularly good at this. It was a very easy case.
Yeah, accidentally right. Stumbled into the right conclusion from. But yeah, I found it a really interesting story just because I feel like Hunter was really specific on the whole God was wrong for this free will example in regards to hardening the Pharaoh's hearts, right? And I feel like I don't disagree with him on the substance. It feels like I'm disagreeing with him on tactics and interpretations of the same, because I think we do agree on the same things, is getting into the second part of the story. I feel like it makes a more stronger argument of why God has forsaken his free will, not because he's been punishing Pharaoh for doing an objectively evil thing of enslaving people, or at least doing some weird segregation society. It's by once God is in charge and there is no Pharaoh to be the scapegoat in that sense, they start worshipping the golden calf, and he's like, "Oh, I'm just going to slaughter them," and it's upon Moses he's created who has to convince him out of it. I feel like that's a more interesting thing because. Because God did liberate them, right? He did give them that agency to have free will, and then they did that to eventually worship someone else, and it resulted in the Ten Commandments, which has that one passage of "You'll have no gods other than me," which is a complete rejection of people's ability to have free will, or at least to use their free will in that way, if it exists or not. And I don't know, I feel like that's more compelling than just saying, well, then the Pharaoh point.
Maybe, but here's the issue with that though. Typically, when people invoke free will, and I don't sign off on free will arguments like this. I think they're pretty philosophically weak. I think if you wanted to make an argument like that, you'd have to go the Kant route, and you'd have to say like, look, maybe free will exists, but if it does, it exists in a capacity that is entirely outside of our ability to cognize. Certainly to gain knowledge of empirically. So we have to invoke another causality outside of the one that we are capable of sort of thinking. Because human brains are the conditions of thought and experience are the manifolds of time and space. We think in time, we observe things.
In the context of the story, we're dealing with people who have been starving, who have been marching in the desert for years, was it months at a time? It's like we're not dealing with the most
Sure.
stable people.
Yeah. But I mean, you can take like a harsh Hobbes point of view, right? And Hobbes would say, for example, if your people is conquered by an enemy and they say, "Be our slave or we'll kill you," for Hobbes, you have contracted away your freedom if you've decided to keep your life at the expense of being a slave, because you could have just chosen death. That's the thing you could have chosen to do. And so even then, like a libertarian free will approach can kind of maintain. Um, I don't think it makes much sense philosophically, but it's not necessarily challenged on those grounds in particular, because that's you're still operating in the same territory. It's a different explanation for the same phenomena. You have to justify one explanation over the other one. The reason why libertarian free will, or even just free will as a concept, seems to be sort of redundant and philosophically unnecessary, if not incoherent, is precisely because you're invoking the existence of a force or a line of causality that seems to be independent of the world itself. Like, what does it mean for your decisions to not be determined by previous action? Obviously, they're determined by previous action. You have decisions forced upon you, and you make decisions based upon your feelings about them, what you want, what you don't want, and you don't choose what you want and don't want. Not in that way. Not without invoking a whole bunch of prior events to motivate those things as well. So it's completely motivated by the desire for particular outcomes. There's no rational or justifiable reason to invoke free will, except for the fact that it makes certain accounts of justice and culpability more coherent than not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say this is where I do fundamentally disagree with Hunter's caller, which is I do feel like he was motivated by that reasoning to say that God was inherently in the right. And as I was going through the story, I was like, all right, let's have a look, see if. And as I was going into it, I interpreted it as it was completely free will argument in regards to the Pharaoh, that it was only him hardening his own heart and being really stubborn. But as you go into the text, it's a little bit more complicated.
Yeah.
And
Well, like why does it? Yeah. Well, why does it matter if Pharaoh's free will is being flouted? Like, what are the stakes exactly for him?
Well, it would. So, sorry, for the caller or for Hunter?
The caller. For the caller.
For the caller. Okay, so free will would be important because if the Pharaoh is using his free will and he's lying, saying that he's going to comply with his to free the Israelites and follow God, then that and it's not God influencing that decision, it would make God look really bad, and it would make a morally unjustifiable approach to achieving the three goals if he can only just achieve one and save a bunch of lives in that process. I feel like that's motivated reasoning.
Maybe, but why here's a why is that the locus of the moral dilemma here? This one man, like we have the particular reasons. We can use a utilitarian calculus if we want to justify it after the fact. Maybe God was grossly unfair to this one human being, but the consequence of that was a long chain of developments that will eventually give rise to the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, and everything will be loverly as a result. And hell, you know what? We even have like big cultural traditions now that have conquered the globe. It's maybe in some really awful ways, but banned slavery. We have increasing freedoms for people. Economic prosperity.
Yeah, free markets increase, GDP, all this stuff. Yeah.
At the very least, within certain geographical regions, we are a lot kinder, or we pretend we are at least, than we were a long time ago, or seem to be in some ways. Maybe it was all worth it. But here's why focus on Pharaoh in that case? Because
sorry, your microphone cut out.
Did I cut out? Like why focus on Pharaoh at all in that case? How about all of the Egyptians who didn't get a choice? If God is going to do that, why not just spectacularly kill Pharaoh and have his successor make a decision. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah. Why does it need
there
to be?
There are much easier means you could achieve this. I feel like it's that reasoning.
Just like look here. You want to have like a spectacle for all time to commemorate this, so that everybody knows that you're God. Put a giant fucking hole right where Pharaoh is that goes straight to the core of the earth, and nobody can fill it, and it's just there forever for thousands of years, and you can't physically explain it. You know that'll do the job.
Yeah,
that'll do the job. And you just hear his ghost in there just screaming constantly, "Don't enslave the."
Don't do it. Let me out of here. Damn you, God.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, this is a really fun conversation. I do got to get going there.
No worries. I do too, actually. It's
hopefully we can
1:30 a.m.
Hopefully we could talk again. This was really fun, even though religious debates and philosophy not my area of expertise. Fundamentally, they're just boring.
I've got some modest capacities in this area, but they are incredibly boring. Mostly because people just aren't taking them seriously in an interesting way. But it's like, oh, my eyes glaze over every single time. There's like a crucible debate on biblical ethics or something. It's just so dumb.
That's probably why I'm not going to do this debate. It's like, why am I going to go into this debate with two people who don't care about the subject on things that are way beyond our capacity?
You also you can't win this one. Like, there's just no way.
You just can't win. Yeah. It's like everybody loses, no matter what.
Well, I think Hunter would win this one. I think unfortunately he was just in the right on.
Unfortunately, he would probably just because I'm on. Yeah, I'm just on the. Even if I agree with him, it's like, oh, well, I win because
I do think
I'm
he was
more arrogant in this.
Well, I do think in this particular case, given that he had such an easy task ahead of him, I think it was incredibly graceless of him to just try to stomp this kid instead of just having a back and forth conversation and trying to granted the kid was not being generous either, or doing himself any favors, but it seemed to me that the conversation had no purpose. It was there was no reason except to humiliate him for clicks, which is, you know.
Yeah. So I feel like I'm not someone who cares that much about civility politics, but I do care about, people who have bad positions or wrong positions being led there in good faith and in a way that they understand it. And from my understanding, it's only hardened this other person's opinion, which has been unproductive. It's hardened his heart, right? It's made atheists like me just like, oh, this conversation's annoying, and maybe turned off on his position, even if he's right or not. And I feel like we could have more productive conversations, like we had here about free will. And
do you have do you run a channel at all, or do you just go on calls every so often?
No, I just go on calls every so often. If people want to follow me, it's at Deny Milkshakes, which is my Twitter. I post a bunch of stuff.
You can just search SchizoBailey too if you. Tell you what. Message me the name. I'll put it in the description so people can find you.
Hell yeah! Awesome. This was really fun.
Those big Twitter bucks.
Well, I ain't getting that verification anytime soon. So, Twitter bucks means zero. Actually, -0.
Well, I've looked at I haven't double checked this, but I've seen the people who were expecting a big payout complaining. I think like Tim Pool got a few $100 or something, or it was crazy low for how big these channels are, or these accounts are.
Yeah, what's funny is they started out with like 5,000 or so. I think like 6,000, maybe even 10,000.
And then there were like deductions or something.
Something like that. And they were like, "Whoa, this is awesome! I got paid for all these tweets." And then they got really low, and now they're complaining. Oh, I found that so funny. I think it's because they were giving them like lifetime payments, like more than they should get.
Oh my god. Oh, I see. So the big ones were initial, and then the following ones were like, I see.
Yeah, it's like when you get back pay, for like work you haven't done, and then you realize, oh, my paycheck is actually really low.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I gotta go. This is really fun.
Yeah. Let's chat again sometime. Have a good night. All right, that's it for tonight. Oh, I just saw your message, Leo. Sorry about that. All right, let's find out where I'm sending you all. Hopefully, people have heeded my call and they've given me redirect permissions. Is Ico Rule still going? I think Ico is still going. Brilliant. All right, say hi to Ico for me. Have a good night, everyone.